My family and I have been part of the Cedar Lane community for more than a decade. We came to Cedar Lane because of your willingness to host our campfire scouting group. During the 11 years our group met here, many lasting memories were made. S'mores at the fire pit, camping trips, important life lessons learned, and lots of crafts, including our annual Valentine's for Veterans card making that so many of you helped out with during coffee hour. And we appreciated your support during our holiday poinsettia plant sale. My family and I have been enriched in countless ways through our involvement with Cedar Lane. Cedar Lane is so well served by your entire ministry team, including your ministries of music, religious education, social justice, administration, and the tech team. So naturally, I said yes when my colleagues, the Reverend Katie and Reverend Abby, offered this opportunity to share a few thoughts with you. I'm speaking from my home office. My family and I live in a condo just a few blocks south of the Politics and Prose bookstore on Connecticut Avenue. I've been a UU minister for 23 years, following more than 20 years working on and around Capitol Hill. I still am a policy wonk. Since ordination, I've served 7 of our congregations as an interim minister, including 5 in the greater Washington area. Now I'm in my 13th year on the staff of the UUA, and I remain a minister with policy wonk responsibilities. As Katie said, my staff manages the UUA health and insurance plans, the retirement plan, our compensation program, and the Living Tradition Fund that provides financial assistance to religious professionals and other congregational staff. While I live in DC, my office and most of my staff team are at the UUA headquarters in Boston. Or at least they were before the pandemic closed our office building. I used to travel quite a bit, about 60, maybe 70 flights a year. Now I've been working at home since March the 12th, 164 days ago. But who's counting? Since I spend a lot of time in hotels, or at least I used to spend a lot of time in hotels, I fell in love with today's reading the very first time I read it. In the unexpected stairway, it invites each of us to slow down, consider taking an alternate path to our destination, while opening our eyes to what otherwise might be hidden in our hustle and bustle to get where we are going or to accomplish the next task of our lives. It reminds me to explore the beauty, the meaning, and the life that can be found in otherwise unexplored corners. What about you? Do you tend to be a straight line person, or do you meander from location to location or one task to another? I love this reading because it invites me to explore the world surrounding me. And I need to be reminded. Perhaps you do too. I spend most of my days sitting at this desk with a messy bookcase hidden behind my Burmese Zoom screen. From time to time, I take a break or head to our living room to make a phone call or read a document. Sitting on our couch this spring, I realized how special the view from our 6th floor home. It's a view down Connecticut Avenue, but it's so much more. It's an opening to the broader world, to the comings and goings along Connecticut Avenue, but also to the changing view of the seasons. Immediately outside our corner window is a southern magnolia tree. I watched it flowering this spring and continue to watch various birds finding respite in its shade. From my office window, my view is a line of ginkgo trees. As spring arrived, the trees leafed out, and I watched squirrels chase each other from branch to branch. I can't wait until the fall when the leaves turn a golden yellow. I share this with you because I'm not naturally inclined to pay too much attention to the daily ebbs and flow of nature. There's usually too much on my to-do list, including my travel to Boston and elsewhere. But in doing so, I know I miss a lot. During the pandemic shutdown, I've been giving a lot of thought to our futures. The future of my 20-year-old son, the future of our nation and the world. So much rests with the upcoming elections. Will America blindly return to normalcy, and is normalcy even possible? What is society going to look like in a year, in 3 years, in 5 years? Can we find a way back from the abyss? I've also been thinking a lot about Unitarian Universalism. How will the pandemic change our faith? How will a year of virtual worship, religious education, and other programming change our congregations, our members, and our staff? I've been worried for years about the economic sustainability of our ministries as the cost of graduate education rise exponentially, as Katie shared just a few moments ago. Congregation budgets flatten and personnel costs consume an increasing percentage of budgets. In thinking about the future of our faith, I revisited our past and identified 4 core principles that will help guide us into the uncertain future. These 4 principles are: 1, an understanding that our theology regularly evolves. 2, a willingness of our faith to both welcome change while simultaneously resisting it. 3, a commitment to work toward a more caring and just society. And 4, a desire to expand our own circle of inclusion. Now let's explore each of these 4 for a few moments. The first of these 4 principles is an understanding that our theology evolves over time. As people of faith, we prefer to skip the elevator to the divine, and instead we take the stairs where emerging beliefs can be explored on each jeweled landing. Or to state it differently, we question established doctrine while envisioning new interpretations. This certainly was the case with many of our earliest foreparents. In the 16th century, for instance, Michael Servetus in France, the Rakovian Brethren in Poland, and the Unitarians of Transylvania bravely asserted that Jesus was a moral teacher who sought to lead people by his example to a loving God, rather than part of a Trinitarian vengeful God. Even today, more than 100 congregations keep the flame of Unitarianism alive in Transylvania, including our partner church in Dietzow St. Martin. Or consider John Relly, an 18th century Welshman, who argued that Jesus' death saved all humankind and that no one was condemned to eternal damnation. Relly influenced John Murray, who would bring his radical belief in universal salvation to the American colonies, establishing the first Universalist congregation in Gloucester, Massachusetts in 1774. A generation later, Scholars at Harvard College would apply literary criticism to the Bible, challenging many of the widespread beliefs regarding its authorship. Harvard College embraced Unitarianism in the early 19th century, a move that influenced generations of American clergy and congregations. In the last half century, Unitarian Universalism continued to evolve. The rise and dominance of humanism, the fellowship movement, the consolidation of Universalism and Unitarianism, the emergence of women's spirituality, the language of reverence, eco-spirituality, and increasing demands for worship that is more inclusive and representative of a growing diverse membership. The second core principle of our faith is our willingness to challenge the traditions of our past while envisioning our future. This has often led to tension between adherents of the old and the proponents of the new that only time resolves. Arguably, one of the most influential forebears of our faith was Ralph Waldo Emerson. If Harvard College was the room where liberal Christianity was happening in the 19th century, Emerson chose to leave it. After resigning his pulpit, Emerson embarked on a career as lecturer and essayist. With publication of his essay Nature, the Transcendentalist movement was launched. The Transcendentalists, most of whom were Unitarian, believed the soul's intuition, rather than reason or scripture, was the best possible source of any religious knowledge. They believed the individual could directly experience God without an intermediary, and God could best be observed in nature. Theodore Parker, another transcendentalist, preached that Christianity would exist as a philosophy even if Jesus never lived. The Transcendentalists were the forerunners of what would emerge in the 20th century as eco-spirituality, our understanding of the independent web of all existence, and our embrace of world religions. But at the time of their emergence, the Transcendentalists were not well received by the established leaders of Unitarianism. It took time to reconcile the new with the old. In the 20th century, Unitarianism balanced its tradition of liberal Christianity with the emerging philosophy of humanism. This turn was inevitable given our long-standing commitment to scientific rationalism. Humankind, through science, technology, and education, was making great advances. The traditional concept of God just didn't meet the needs of modernity. God, if there was one, was far too distant and far too unresponsive to the great moral challenges of the day. Rather than speculating on the existence of God or the nature of heaven, the humanists focused on making a better world today. In the years following the Second World War, humanism became our dominant theology. While humanism is still the dominant theology in Unitarian Universalism, there remains tension between those who embrace a humanism grounded in atheism and those whose humanism is comfortable with traditional religious language. One argues that language is literal and should not be misused, while the other argues it's metaphor. As the ancestors of our faith looked beyond their congregations to the wider world, as they looked outside their windows, they increasingly recognized the injustices of the world. Working to make the world a more just and caring society is yet another core principle of Unitarian Universalism. In the 19th century, our foreparents led the effort to establish various social service and social justice movements, including universal public education. Thomas Mann was the very first Secretary of Education in the United States. The social work movement, services for the mentally ill, the animal welfare movement, and education of the blind and other disabled individuals. Many Unitarian Universalists were leaders in the abolitionist movement, and of course, Clara Barton founded the American Red Cross. In 1917, the Universalist Church of America called for a program of national social insurance, a living wage, quality education, and adequate housing for all children. What a great platform for today. And this is over 100 years ago. And just this week, we celebrated the 100th anniversary of the enactment of the 19th Amendment that guaranteed women, or at least some women, the right to vote. It's important to note that many of the leaders of the suffrage movement, including Susan B. Anthony, Mary Livermore, and Lucy Stone, were grounded in our faith tradition. Throughout the 20th century, Unitarian Universalists have held leadership roles in the American Civil Liberties Union, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the Americans for Democratic Action, the Urban League, Amnesty International, and so many others. And of course, in 1965, dozens of Unitarian Universalist clergy and lay people responded to Dr. King's plea for people of faith to join him in Selma. And 2 Unitarian Universalists gave their lives to that cause. During the past 50 years, Unitarian Universalists have marched, advocated, been arrested, were leaders in numerous justice movements, including unfortunately, the serious economic justice, Black Lives Matter, and many more. You know the list. Many Cedar Laners of the past and present were among their number. They are today. And today, many UU congregations are active in the UU The Vote initiative, environmental justice, and the sanctuary movement. Cedar Lane has provided a sanctuary and home to Rosa and her children. Yet so much more needs to be done, both in our society and our own faith tradition, to ensure equity and justice. The final principle that I wish to highlight is our desire to expand the circle of inclusion within our faith tradition, to expand those who are sitting at the table. We have had some notable successes which deserve celebration. Going back more than a century and a half, both the Universalists and Unitarians ordained women into the ministry. These early pioneers in the pulpit were a relatively small group, numbering less than 100 in 1892, but they planted seeds that blossomed in just the last few decades. During my second year as a parish minister in 1998, our denomination became the first religious movement in the United States to have women as a majority of their working clergy. We've also been trailblazers in the rights of LGBTQ individuals. In the early 1980s, openly gay and lesbian individuals began serving our congregations as ministers. Our clergy officiated at same-sex ceremonies for years, and Unitarian Universalists were in the forefront of the fight for same-gender marriages. Did you know that 7 of the 14 plaintiffs of the landmark court decision in Massachusetts were Unitarian Universalists, and that the first marriage, same-gender marriage in Massachusetts was officiated by the president of the UUA at the time with 2 UUs? But we still have much work to do. Transgendered and non-binary individuals still haven't found a secure place in our circle of faith, nor do people with disabilities. Far too many of our congregations are not fully accessible nor accommodating of the specific needs of individuals. This is particularly true of our religious education programs, where children with special needs, particularly those who are neurodiverse, are not always adequately served. And our greatest challenge continues to be welcoming people of color into our faith. The Black Lives Matter movement has shined a spotlight on so many inequities in our society. Just as society is grappling with the effects of white supremacy, so is our association and our member congregations. The recently issued report of the UUA Commission on Institutional Change provides a roadmap to help our faith take concrete steps to address the systemic cultural racism found in our faith community. The work will not be easy, but it must be undertaken to ensure our future. What makes our faith so difficult to grasp is that our focus is on how to live in relationship with others and with the environment without the overlay of a unique relationship with a supernatural being. We see the world as pluralistic. We understand that there are many paths to the sacred in life. We see truth as evolving and therefore not absolute, and certainly not sealed in one book or a collection of books written in the distant past. We believe the questions one asks are often more important than the answers one receives. Our theology focuses not on a creator, but the creation. Our comfort as individuals struggling to live our lives in a complex world lies not in the hope of a better life in the hereafter, but in our collective efforts to improve life in the here and now. Our hope as a people of faith lies not in the hands of a supernatural being, but in the sacredness of humanity itself. There is a power greater than one individual, and that power is love. Our responsibility as a community is to extend the healing power of love, compassion, and justice to everyone we encounter. This is the critical work at any time, but even more so during this time of pandemic and economic challenge. So may it be.